Hi again. Welcome to Guru Gedar. Glad to meet you with another interesting lesson. Yes, a literature lesson. Can you remember our topic? Yes, The Prince and the Pauper by Mark Twain. Today we are going to do lesson 2. I think again you can remember these two pictures, the picture of the prince and the pauper. Let's have a recapitulation. Can you remember what we did in the last lesson? Yes, we discussed about the author Mark Twain. What can you remember about Mark Twain? Can you name some other books written by this writer? Yes, other than The Prince and the Pauper? We discussed that. Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Can you remember them? Second one, the historical background and setting. Can you remember the historical background? Yes, the story was set in 16th century England, Tudor period. Then we discussed the plot summary. Yes, we discussed it briefly. Then characters were introduced. Can you remember some of the characters? Yes, the main two characters, Tom Canty and Prince Edward Tudor. And what are the other characters? Can you name some of them? John Canty, Mother Canty, King Henry VIII, then after that Lady Elizabeth I, then Lady Mary, Lady Jane Grey, Lord Hertford and St. John's. Yes, there are many such characters. Yes. Now let's go to today's lessons. What shall we do today? We'll see. Yes. We are going to do chapter analysis. Chapter 1. Now you know the story. We did the plot summary. But we are going to analyze chapter by chapter. In this first chapter, the plot begins with the birth of two boys, Tom Canty and Edward Tudor, on the same day in the same town, London, England. So, at the very beginning, the writer deals with the theme, which is the gap between rich and poor. So, richness is represented by the prince, Edward, yes, and poverty is represented by Tom Canty. Twain immediately begins to contrast the two boys. One is poor and unwanted, and the other is very rich and very much desired. So you can see, John Canty was not happy when Tom Canty was born. He thought it is another mouth to be fed because they are poor and they are beggars. Yes. Then King Henry was eagerly waiting for the birth of his son. Throughout the novel, Twain will continue the series of contrasts between the two boys, which he sets in motion here. Chapter 2, it emphasizes the environment in which Tom Canty has been brought up. The name of the area, Awful Court, means refuse and defecation, and is the home of London's most wretched and poor. So you can see that name is symbolic, Awful Court. Although he was born to such an environment, Tom possesses a certain intelligence and sensitivity, and he attempts to escape from the miseries of his surroundings. Soon, Tom Canty is addicted to live in a world of fantasy, a world in which he pictures himself to be a part of the life. Yes, He dreamt of charmed life of a petted prince in a regal palace. So look at the picture. Tom is dreaming of being a prince. His dreams cause him to try to be clean and to hope someday to be clothed in something other than the rags that he wears. Examples: in his dreams, Tom has imaginary Lord Chamberlains and other court officials to serve him. These roles were played by his friends. This portends chapter 32, Coronation Day, a chapter that describes a procession. Yes, what kind of procession? Yes, it is a procession in which Tom rides with a real Lord Chamberlain. As they pass Awful Court, Tom looks out and sees the boys who used to be his imaginary Lord Chamberlains. So can you imagine the scenery? How do you feel? Think if you are the prince or you are Tom Canty, how do you feel? Then Tom is taught by Father Andrew how to read and write Latin. This will later cause consternation among the officials of the court, since the real prince knows Latin, Greek and French, while Tom Canty knows only Latin. Here I think you can remember, King also gets the news of the madness of the son, Prince Edward. So he asks some questions in all these languages, Latin, Greek and French. But Tom Canty answers only for Latin. So King also thinks there is a memory loss because he was able to answer in Latin. In later events in the novel, when Tom assumes the role of king, he is called upon to give advice to many people. In this early chapter of the novel, because of his dreams and Father Andrew's moral tales, Tom is sought out by all sorts of people in Awful Court in order to give various types of advice. So all the people in the Awful Court thought that Tom is a wise boy except his father, John Canty. He is very successful in solving these problems. Yes, look at this picture. You can see Tom studies Latin and Father Andrew helps him in his studies. And mother inspires them. Mother likes when Tom learns Latin. Basically, Tom's dreams, his sensitivity and his study of Latin all contribute toward making it somewhat feasible for him to be mistaken for a real prince. Chapter 3, it is Tom's dreaming which causes him to wander aimlessly through the city until he finds himself a real living prince. He was dreaming of seeing a real prince. When Tom is abused by a soldier, the Prince of Wales rebukes the guard. Thus, the Prince of Wales is protesting a simple injustice made against a civilian in England. This indicates Edward Tudor's development into a good humanitarian prince. Yes, so we find two contrasted dreams. What are these contrasted dreams? You can see Tom Canty is dreaming of being a prince. On the other hand, Edward Tudor, the prince, yes, he wants to have a freedom like Tom. So he likes to do all the things that Tom does. So you can see in the picture, both of them talk about their lives. One of the main intellectual points of Twain's novel is the notion that clothes do not determine a person's worth, his character, or his nature. I think you can remember at the very beginning of lesson 1 also I told that. So, in the picture you can see the two boys exchange their clothes. And the Prince of Wales says to Tom, "Thou hast the same hair, same eyes, the same voice and manner, the same form and stature, the same face and countenance that I bear. Fared we forth naked, there is none could say which was you and which the Prince of Wales." Consequently, for a joke, they exchange clothes. When the prince notices the bruise upon Tom's hand, he immediately goes out to rebuke the soldier. The prince, before leaving, quickly puts away an article of national importance that lays upon the table. Now, can you remember this article? The article of national importance? Yes, that is the Great Seal of England. So, you can see in the picture the armor, suit of armor. So, he hides it inside the armor. "Be off, thou crazy rubbish!" However, he is mistaken for a pauper as he is in the clothes of a pauper. So, in the picture you can see how this sentry chases away this prince thinking that he is the pauper. These are the words of the soldier. "Be off, thou crazy rubbish!" It re-emphasizes Twain's point about the absurdity of evaluating a person merely by the nature of his clothes. Plot-wise, the insignificant action of hiding the Great Seal will ultimately become significant to identify the real prince and restore him in rightful position. So, at the very beginning of the novel, we also don't notice this simple action, but later at the end of the novel, it becomes very important. Yes. Throughout the novel, this article, what is this article? The Great Seal of England. It is an item that plays an important role involving both Tom and the prince. Let's go to this video clip and see how the king gives the Great Seal to the prince, because he wants the prince to study this Great Seal as he is going to be the next king.
"Edward, soon you will be king.
Someday, maybe, but not soon.
Soon you will be king. And you have many gifts to help you in your task. But remember, the greatest gift in a ruler is to be a judge of men. Are you frightened? Tell me."
Yes. But it is my fate, and I must get used to it.
Open that casket. In it you will find the Great Seal of England. It is the symbol of our authority. Take it. Keep it with you. Study it. Come to me tomorrow. Bring the seal and tell me your thoughts. Now I must receive your sister.
Yes, what did you see in the video? The king is in his deathbed and he asked the prince to come and bring the Great Seal of England. And he gives some tasks to the prince. He has to study the seal and next day he has to meet the king. Yeah. So, we'll see whether he will be able to meet the king next day or not. The prince, dressed in rags, demands that he should be treated as a prince. and orders people to serve him. The prince utters the truth. I am the Prince of Wales. My person is sacred, and thou shalt hang for laying thy hand upon me. So, those days, the king and the prince were considered as sacred people. So, no one can touch them. That's why they had the whipping boy in their studies. So, what happens when this prince says such words? Whenever he utters such words, he is treated as a ruffian and as a knave. Always he was humiliated. Yes. However, later in the novel, when he becomes less strong, he is treated in a better way. Later on, Miles Hendon will consider such exclamation to be part of a world of dreams and shadows. Miles Hendon also thinks this boy has some kind of madness. We'll go to chapter 4 and 5. These chapters, as a unit, present an obvious but rather interesting contrast. In chapter 4, the prince dressed as a pauper confronts a cruel world that has no respect for him. So, he has never experienced such kind of society before. It ends with the prince being considered stark, raving mad. Again, throughout the novel, you find the motif of madness. The following chapter presents the contrast of the pauper, Tom, in the role of the prince, and likewise being considered mad. Again, the motif of madness. Yes, but he is royally mad. Yes, so both boys were treated in two different ways. The prince's troubles in the real world are caused by the mere fact that he considers himself a prince, despite his being dressed as a pauper. What do you understand by that? Yes, although he is wearing rags, prince knows that he is the prince. So he gives commands to those common people. These common people look at the clothing and think this boy is mad. Whenever he says that he is the prince, they laugh at him. The boys whom he approaches at Christ's hospital treat him at first with laughter until he insists that he is the prince. Then he is treated scornfully. Whenever he insists that he is the Prince of Wales, he is treated rudely. Ultimately, he is beaten and dogs are set on him. So, by this time, he has no any experience of the outside world. That's why he behaves in this way. The prince is finally discovered by John Canty, who believes the lad to be his own son. Even though John Canty considers his son to be mad, he still subjects him to beating. So you can understand how mad people were treated during Tudor period. Thus, the real world that the Prince of Wales dreamed about is not as all like the world he imagined. So he only thought about the freedom, but the real world is not a pleasant one for him. In contrast, Tom's dreams have all come true. He has indeed become a prince like the ones he dreamed about. But his real situation is not as pleasant as his old dreams. Why do you think so? Because he was virtually imprisoned in the palace. He has no freedom. In particular, Tom is frightened that at any moment he will be discovered and punished for wearing the prince's royal clothing. So, in the picture you can see how he is frightened. His face expresses his feeling. Surprisingly, his actions and behavior do not convince the royal court. that he is not the real prince, for he looks like the prince and he is dressed like the prince. So, here the most important thing is he is dressed like the prince. That is why other people or the courtiers considered him as the prince. When the king asks Tom a question in Latin, Tom is able to respond to the question in Latin, but no in other languages, French and Greek. This test proves that Tom is indeed the Prince of Wales. No pauper could possibly know Latin. That is impossible. Looking backward, we can notice why Mark Twain had Father Andrew teach Tom some Latin. He purposely did that. The mad scene is emphasized satirically and ironically by Twain because the heir to the throne of England is considered mad, and yet, in spite of his being mad, it is decided that he must be installed as heir apparent immediately, because there should be a king for the country. The king is very old now, he is in his deathbed. Tom comes to know that the Duke of Norfolk is condemned to death. He determines to correct this injustice. However, as soon as Tom becomes the king of England, his first act is to countermand the order. Chapter 6 to 9. These 4 chapters present Tom's rather traumatic adjustment to his sudden role as the Prince of Wales. All of his many blunders are accounted for by the fact that he is believed to be mad. But you can notice no one tells anything to him. No one needs to mention the fact that he is mad. But the rumor spreads quickly. How do you know that? Example, yes, you find it in chapter 27. Their old Blake Andrew tells Miles Hendon and the true Prince of Wales that the king is mad, but 'tis death to speak of it. So that's why no one can speak about it. They are condemned to death if they speak about that. Look at the picture. This is the prison. You can see Miles Hendon meets Blake Andrew at the prison. He secretly tells Miles Hendon about the situation of the country as well as the situation at the Hendon Halls. In the second chapter, Mark Twain emphasized that Tom Canty was a quick learner. This fact is illustrated again in chapter 6, as Tom is able to learn his new role rather quickly. So, he was able to adapt to the new situation quickly. So, that is why we say he is a quick learner, he is intelligent. So, this is how Mark Twain reports the improvement of Tom Canty. Soon, there are fewer and fewer snags and sandbars as Tom grows more and more at ease in his new surroundings. So, you can see Humphrey Marlowe helps him in his adaptation. Chapter 7 deals essentially with the various types of blunders that Tom quite naturally makes during his first day as prince, and especially during his first royal dinner. Example, now these are the blunders made by Tom at the dinner table. First, that is natural. Poor Tom ate with his fingers mainly, but no one smiled at it or even seemed to observe it. So, they were fear of observing that because this is the prince. After seeing the dainty napkin, he says, so you can see he didn't like to wipe his hands by the napkin, thinking that he makes it dirty. Yes, he says, Prithee, take it away, lest in mine unheedfulness it be soiled. Yes. Tom examined the turnips and the lettuce with interest and asked what they were and if they were to be eaten. So again, you can find Mark Twain deals with the theme of the gap between rich and poor. So you can see Tom has never seen such kind of food. He was a poor lad before. When he had finished his dessert, he filled his pockets with nuts. Yes, so a prince usually does not do such kind of action, but Tom did. So again the writer says, Tom gazed at the dish a puzzled moment or two, then raised it to his lips and gravely took a draught. See, so when he had to wash his hands, what did he do? He thought he had to drink it. So that is another blunder he made at the dining table. And it brings humor also. Yes, Tom's next unconscious blunder was to get up and leave the table just when the chaplain had taken his stand behind his chair and with uplifted hands and closed uplifted eyes were in the act of beginning the blessing. So he was not aware of that. He just stood up and went to his chamber. So in this short video, you can see the blunders Tom makes at the dining table. Let's see.
Well, if you're sure.
So, did you notice he first offers his food to his servants? So, servants are frightened, they never notice it. Tom discovers the great seal because in his daydreams of being a prince, he always wanted to wear a suit of armor. So, you know where the prince hid the great seal. It is inside the suit of armor. So, as Tom was interested in this suit, when he was watching this suit, observing this suit, he accidentally found this great seal of England, but he didn't know what it was. Here Twain mentions the greaves, the gauntlets, the plumed helmet and other such pieces of armor. So, these words explain the parts of this armor. When Tom is trying on these pieces, he finds the great seal. Tom's ability to read and to learn quickly allows him to read the etiquette book about the English court. Yes, he finds a book, that book is about etiquettes in the palace. So, he reads it and gets the knowledge, he gets the knowledge about the etiquettes in the palace. Thus, he instructs himself on how to act in some of the situations which he will soon encounter. In chapter 8, the subject of the Great Seal of England is expanded upon. It is made clear that only the true Prince of Wales knows where this Great Seal is. It is needed in order to make the official commanding of the Duke of Norfolk's death. Consequently, Tom ignorantly uses it as a nutcracker. The loss of the Great Seal temporarily delays Norfolk's death. Tom strongly objects the death of Duke Norfolk. The main purpose of chapter 9 seemingly has little to do with the plot of the novel. There you don't find much development of the plot. But what is the aim of the Twain here? It is a kind of timeout during which Twain details the richness and pageantry of the royal court of England. In describing this scene, Twain tries to make references to the historical accuracy. He mentions certain actions that Tom must perform in order to dispel the rampant rumors of his madness. In this chapter, Tom Canty, who tries to adjust to the role of being a prince, is described at length. Next, our attention is shifted to the trials and tribulations which the Prince of Wales encounters as a common citizen. Interestingly, in a later chapter, we will hear the prince expresses the concept that all kings should be forced to live the life of a common citizen in order to understand the problems that the common man faces. So, you can understand Mark Twain uses different characters to convey his message, that is his message. For the present, the first thing that the young prince learns as a commoner concerns the absolute brutality of life itself. Having shifted from living a luxury life with over 300 servants, the prince now finds that the life of a pauper is a fearsome contrast. So again, Mark Twain deals with the theme of gap between rich and poor. Twain contrasts the two different lifestyles by elaborating the royal pageantry described in chapter 9 with all of its sumptuous luxury. Meanwhile, John Canty drags the prince through awful court. Tom Canty is considered to be mad by the courtiers in the palace. The real prince is likewise considered to be mad by the family members of Tom Canty and the gang. Again, you can observe the motive of madness. Example, Tom's mother thinks that her son has read so much that this foolish reading had taken wit away. So, he faced a memory loss because of this too much study. That is what mother thought. The father, John Canty, also considers his son to be too much involved in fine mummeries and foolery. Here, Twain is emphasizing the central contrast between the prince and the pauper. Tom Canty is believed to be the mad Prince of Wales, but he is cuddled and protected and given every possible consideration. So, no one spoke about that, you notice, and they pretended that they don't notice his madness. On the other hand, the Prince of Wales, believed to be a pauper, is treated brutally by his father. Here, so-called father, that is Tom Canty. You know he is not the real father of this prince. Yes. So, he was treated brutally by his father and grandmother and receives no sympathy. So, you can see in the picture how John Canty treats this boy. In chapter 10, yes, Tom's mother devises a test to make sure whether this young lad is truly her son or not. So, in the previous lesson, I think you can remember, she felt something strange in this boy. She noticed a difference. So, she wanted to test this boy. We will see what she does. The test involves an automatic reflex that Tom Canty always does when he encounters something unexpected. What is this action? Yes, like this, palms outward before his eyes. Yes, in the picture you can see, like this. Yet, after 3 trials, Mother Canty was not able to make a decision. She still questions whether or not the boy is really her son. The problem is their resemblance. They look alike, but there is a slight difference in their behavior. Yes, we'll go to the video clip and you can notice how Mother Canty tests her son.
You have lost your trick of shielding your face, Tom. I thought it was your way when you were startled. It may be Tom's way. It is not mine. Why have you woken me?
So you can notice the mother is puzzled. Now the prince wakes up and asks, "Why did you wake me up?" Yes, it might be your Tom's way. He says such things. And mother notices he does not keep his palms outward in front of his eyes. So he never sees Tom's familiar action. In chapter 31, when Tom Canty is on his way to be crowned king and the procession passes Awful Court, he sees his mother unexpectedly in the crowd, and yes, I think you can remember this event. Yes, automatically he gets his action, spontaneous action. Yes, up flew his hands, palms outward before his eyes. So there, mother recognizes her son. That old involuntary gesture, born of a forgotten episode and perpetrated by habit. That is how Mark Twain reports the event. The test that Tom's mother performs is contrasted with the suspicion that both the Lord St. John and the Lord Hertford had concerning the true identity of the Prince of Wales. So you can see when St. John's has some kind of suspicion regarding the prince, you can see he tells it to Lord Hertford, but Lord Hertford threatens him and tells him not to talk about that. So in the video clip you can see their conversation. So when St. John reveals his suspicion, you can see how this Lord Hertford, how he acts words.
What? This morning there was something. I don't know. He did not seem mad, and he has more dignity than he has ever had before.
If I hear one more word of this, I tell you now, I'll see you drawn and quartered with your entrails burned before your eyes. So look you, brother.
And you can notice he was not allowed to express his feelings even, okay, and he thinks the boy is not mad, okay, so he felt something different. So you can see these two suspicions are contrasted, mother's suspicion and Lord St. John's suspicion. Yes, Twain's point is clear. Despite even slight difference in the character and personality of a person, his clothes ultimately determine his status. Yeah. Unfortunately, a pauper is a pauper because he wears a pauper's clothes, and a prince is a prince merely because he wears a prince's clothes. So at the very beginning of our lesson, I mean in lesson 1, we discussed that. In the picture, you can see Mother Canty's trial to identify her son. She makes a sound and she checks whether she can see the familiar action of her son, but she was not able to see that. You know, this is not Tom Canty, but the prince. And this is the familiar action, spontaneous action of Tom Canty, palms outward before his eyes. John Canty accidentally strikes a stranger in the mob. The stranger turns out to be old Father Andrew, now dying. The death of Father Andrew makes for the Cantys to flee from Awful Court. Therefore, it was impossible for real Tom Canty to know where his family is. The Cantys have enough freedom to leave Awful Court easily. Again, it is contrasted with the imprisonment in the palace. Yes, in the palace, Tom Canty doesn't have any freedom. It is contrasted with the circumstance of the royal court and the virtual imprisonment that Tom Canty finds himself in as Prince of Wales. He has no freedom in the palace. Another major plot element involves the prince's escape from John Canty. The loving cup, the one offered to John Canty, has to be held with both hands, or else the tradition is not considered to be an honorable one. So, he had to hold the loving cup by both hands like this. Okay? We will see how he holds it. In the picture you can see John Canty holds the loving cup with both hands. So, what will happen next? We will see. Can you guess? Thus, when John Canty takes the loving cup in both hands, it allows the prince to escape. The intention of the prince is to return to court and make himself known. So, we will go to this video clip and you can see how John Canty drinks from the loving cup, holding it by both hands like this, and at that moment prince escapes from him. See.
You, are you boatman? I would cross the river.
Will you not join us in a toast, Fred?
I've no time for that. Are you free or not?
Hold on. There's no rush so great, but you have time to drink the prince's health.
The prince? What prince?
What prince do you think? The Prince of Wales. He who will die in yonder building this very night. God bless him!
Hey!
Will you not bless him too, sir?
I bless no prince nor no king neither. Now get out of my way. I have business of my own.
Aye, sir, you shall not pass, whatever your business, till you have drunk the prince's health and drunk it deep. Give him the cup and make the sour knave drink, or we will feed him to the fishes.
Did you notice how John Canty drinks from the loving cup? And you can see prince escapes from him. So, you can see this topic of the video is the prince again escapes from John Canty. So, you notice this is a repetitive incident you find throughout the novel. He escapes from John Canty for several times like this. The prince first misunderstands Tom as an impostor because he didn't know what happened at the palace. He is furious and vows that Tom Canty is hanged, drawn and quartered. However, after the Prince of Wales has lived as a commoner for a time and is finally restored to his rightful kingship, his many and varied experiences as a pauper have taught him great compassion and tolerance. So, you can see that Tom Canty reveals that he is not the king, but finally it is proved that real prince is the one who is wearing the rags. This is the end of today's lesson. So, I would like to summarize what we talked today. So, we started the chapter analysis. We analyzed from chapter 1 to 10. So, hope you have studied your book. It is from chapter 1 to 10. In the next day, we continue from chapter 11. So, you better go through your book and get ready for the next lesson. Hope to meet you with another interesting lesson. Goodbye.